Hi, folks. Jason Dynison here to talk about Form 1099K. There's some new things with that for 2024 and actually 2023 as well. So let's talk a little about what this form is and what those changes are. I put together a little PowerPoint. Unlike some of the other videos that I've done, this might be a little longer and more intensive just because there's some setup that has to be done in order to really understand what Form 1099K even is and what we're really talking about. Okay, so in order to understand the 1099K changes and what the big deal is, we need to understand that 1099K interacts with 1099 NEC, the form that's issued to independent contractors. And so with contract labor, a business would normally report on a 1099 NEC if the business is paying with their company credit card or debit card or some third-party processors. That would be like PayPal and Venmo and places like that. The business does not issue a 1099 NEC. Instead, the processor on the back end handling the transaction has a reporting requirement called a 1099K. So that's a little background setup that you need to understand, because if you understand this, then it all starts to come together with what the big deal is about the proposed changes with Form 1099K. So who issues 1099Ks? Well, I'm assuming most people watching this video are not going to be the ones issuing this form unless you're like a credit card merchant processor or you are like Venmo or something like that. You're not going to be issuing this form. So who does issue the form? Third-party settlement organizations. That would be sometimes called merchant processors, whoever the back-end processor is on credit card or debit card transactions. They will send a 1099K to the recipient when the total transactions processed for the year are $600 or more. Third-party network transactions are another situation where 1099Ks are issued. This means places like PayPal and Venmo. So they send a 1099K, but only if the recipient crosses both of these thresholds, 200 transactions processed on the platform and $20,000 received. Specific to those Venmo and PayPal third-party network payments, that transaction threshold, 200 transactions and $20,000 received, means a lot of payments go unreported on 1099K. And here's really what the issue is. The regulations say that the paying business, when paying for contract labor, if they mark that the transaction is for goods and services, or they're paying through the recipient's business account, they don't issue a 1099 NEC because the transaction falls under the 1099K rules. And it is not the payer's responsibility to know if a 1099K will actually be issued, which means there's a lot of unreported income, transactions that don't get on a reporting form. So paying businesses do not issue 1099Ks for contract labor paid through places like Venmo or PayPal or other such processors if they pay through the contractor's business profile or they mark that the transaction is for goods and services. Now, one important note here is places like Bill.com and Zelle are not third-party networks. So the payer of contract labor through a bill pay service like Bill.com or Zelle, they issue a 1099 NEC when paying that way. So the 1099K rules have existed since 2012. It's actually a part of the Affordable Care Act that created this. That's a little trivia question for you. or a trivia factoid for you. And this 200 transaction and $20,000 received threshold has applied since then. That's what the Affordable Care Act set. The American Rescue Plan in 2021 called for a change to the threshold for 2022 calendar year to drop the threshold to 600 with no transaction threshold. This is what the IRS has now delayed 2 times. We'll get to that in just a minute. There have been some misleading articles out there about this that imply that the IRS is coming for your Venmo transactions. And that's true for business Venmo transactions. This does not apply to personal transactions. So this is the problem that the American Rescue Plan was trying to fix. This is not a hypothetical, by the way. This is real. Like, this happens. So let's say a contractor has 25 business clients, and each client pays $10,000 for the year, so $250,000 in total. If payment is made by check or through a bill pay service like Bill.com or Zelle, the paying business would need to issue a 1099 NEC. And so the big bad IRS is going to know all about this contractor's $250,000. But if the payment is a third-party network payment, so say PayPal or Venmo, and the payment is made through the contractor's business profile or the payer marks goods and services, the payer doesn't issue a 1099 NEC. Instead, the 1099K rules apply. And so here's the problem with the current thresholds of 200 transactions and $20,000 received. The contractor received $250,000 through the third-party processor, but only had 25 transactions, which is way below the 200 transaction threshold. So there's no 1099K and no 1099 NEC. So none of this $250,000 gets on any reporting form. Now, the law says the contractor here should report all of their income honestly. It's a myth that if it's not on a reporting form, you don't have to report it. You do. But in the real world, there are some contractors whose eyes would light up at this because they would say, hey, I can choose what I report as income on my tax return, and it can be less than $250,000 and no one will ever know. So this is what the American Rescue Plan was trying to fix, was to change the 1099K reporting threshold to $600. This was supposed to take effect in 2022, but in late 2022, the IRS announced that they were delaying implementation to 2023. And then in late 2023, they announced that they were delaying it another year to 2024. And the IRS also says for 2024 that the threshold will be $5,000, not $600. Not in 2024. They're planning some sort of phased in implementation of the $600 threshold. So to recap, the American Rescue Plan called for the 1099K threshold to drop to $600 starting in 2022. The IRS postponed this for 2022 and now postponed it again for 2023 as well. They're going to implement it with a $5,000 threshold for 2024. That means for 2023, the 1099K threshold is still at 200 transactions and $20,000 processed, which means right now during tax season, there will not be as many 1099Ks issued as there would have been if this change to $600 had gone through and been implemented for 2023. So that's a little about Form 1099K. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you again next time.